so hopefully this is going to go better. I'm just going to chill out for a few minutes while people come in as they get their notifications and see the tweets and shit. Yeah, just hanging out. I just kind of felt bored, so this is what we're doing today. Also, I love to hear myself talk, I guess. That's probably accurate. Let me get everything up. I already posted it in a few places. Let me post it in another place. And we should be good to go in a few minutes. Oh, hey, we have one viewer. How goes it, one viewer? Just gonna get another minute or two for people to come in now that I've actually started. I am glad you're doing good, Cal. Cool shit. Okay. So yeah, oh, I already read chapter 5. Right? Yeah, I already read chapter 5. Let's go on to chapter 6. There we go. Let me know if the sound or the stream or anything is not showing up well. I'm doing a different screen capture this time, which should be fine. Okie dokie, let's get started then. It's been about 4 minutes. Okay, so the recap for where we left off. We are starting the second part of day 3 of the tournament. So Prince Diedrich, aka Dirk, has started a tournament for mysterious purposes, something that has to do with Dave and Karkat. Karkat is suspicious. Dave wants him to calm the fuck down. There have been surprise entrants into the tournament that Dirk was not aware of. And yeah. We've seen a couple people now. There are a lot of characters. If you can kind of see from my tags how many characters I have in here so far. So yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, okay, so chapter 6, tournament day 3, part 2. Tournament day 3 schedule. First round of armed combat. Dave, Karkat, 14 unknown. Second horseback race, John and 8 unknown. This is where I hit 10K. For the first time writing a fic that I was paying attention to is 10K. Yeah, and just more again that I changed the chapter titles, and I don't know. I might change them again, as I keep saying. Karkat was pacing in the waiting area underneath the grandstand, as much as he could with how crowded it was with the contestants, at least. His fellow knights looked at him with concern, but he waved them off, telling them to focus on doing a good job in their matches and congratulating John Dee on making it to the archery quarterfinals. John Dee hesitated, as though he wanted to say something more, then saw Dave approach, bowed lightly to Karkat, and left to sort out his own gear before the match. Karkat stopped his pacing, but still looked off. "We got some fucking weirdos in these matches," he muttered, glancing at the handful of strangers that speckled the room. Dave nodded. "You'll be fine." "I know, but..." Dave shook his head sharply and Karkat shut his mouth. He was right. Now wasn't the time to divulge his paranoia. A trumpet sounded and the servant at the entrance to the stadium gestured for one of the knights and the cloaked woman from the archery match, Miriam, to make their way out. As they did, the woman removed her cloak and draped it on one of the benches. She ran a hand through her hair, fixing it up, and rolled her shoulders and stretched her translucent butterfly wings. Almost everyone in the waiting area gaped as she smoothed down her shiny, scaly, rainbow-sheened armor, then picked up her great axe and exited into the stadium, her still-shocked opponent following automatically behind. Karkat barely noticed the gasp raised from the audience outside, his attention now drawn to another mysterious entrant who was now shedding her own cloak. "Finally! I was wondering if she was going to make us keep these on the whole time," she said, voice almost sounding like a gurgle. Her own decloaking revealed pale pink fins on either side of her head, stretching from temple to collarbone and waving excitedly. She was wearing similar armor, but it shone with pinks and blues rather than the whole rainbow, and there were no wings protruding out the back. "Who invited these fae freaks?" grumbled a voice from close to the exit of the grandstand. Everyone turned and then parted away for the two men. One was tall and gangly, though more striking was his bright green and red face paint. Green and red diamonds over his eyes, green and red spirals on his cheeks like dimples, green and red stripes over his lips like thread. His companion was short and, well, not as built as Karkat, but not quite thin. It was the shorter one who had spoken, mouth twisted into a frown, the man with the painted face resting a hand on his shoulder. What was most of note was they were also both wearing jeweled bands around their foreheads, and the shorter one's doublet bore the sigil of Durst, and the taller one's of Prospect. Everyone near them automatically took a few steps back, but the woman just smiled, wide and sharp. Karkat didn't have time to ruminate on the basis of the prince's rudely worded question. Sure, he hadn't heard of any fae leaving the forest in decades, but the second trumpet sounded, and he was shoved to the wall as everyone clustered to the door and meager slits of windows to try to see the fight outside. Miriam was quick and light on her feet, and practically danced to the knight on the other side of the stadium, axe held out lightly at her side. The man braced himself, small leather shield and sword at the ready, but not quick enough to parry the blow that came from on high, reverberating through his armor. He used the momentum from the blow to roll back into a crouch and tried swiping at her shins, but she jumped over the sword like it was a child's game. She tossed her axe into the other hand and brought it down just above the elbow of the knight's sword arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. He rolled back again, abandoning his blade, and tried to stand, pushing back with his shield. The blows were coming more quickly, but he finally gained enough ground to push up from one knee. But he overstretched, and Miriam brought her axe to his hip, and he dropped again, then called, "I yield!" Miriam froze, then lowered her axe and held out her arm to help the man up, throwing his arm around her shoulders to help him out of the stadium and to a waiting physician as the announcer declared her success. 5 minutes, and she had won. Karkat could feel the unease rolling off his fellow knights, and he didn't have the words to comfort them. He bit his lip in frustration as the other fae was up next, but it was a noble paired with her this time. A noble whose face had gone pale. clearly having signed up for the chance of glory and bragging rights for going against the royal knights, not to face an unknown challenge spoken of in children's bedtime stories. Maybe that's why, after their names were announced, the woman was apparently named Feferi, God, how do I always pronounce her fucking name? Pixis. Pixis? Yeah. In the second trumpet's sound, the match was over within seconds. A sweep to his legs from her polearm left him on the ground with a sharp smile gleaming down at him as he yielded. She seemed disappointed, but helped him up and followed him off the field, the announcer belatedly calling her victory once she had left. That meant Dave was up next, with another noble who looked decidedly relieved. They were announced, the starting trumpet went off, and they stood there, staring each other down for a few seconds, a striking contrast to the instant ferocity of the two women before. Dave's sword was hanging loose at his side, and he stayed there as the noble approached. When she got too close, he began moving to the right, his body never turning from her. She started moving quickly, dashing toward him while he dashed back and around. She started to get impatient and lunged forward, her mace swinging out toward him. Dave blocked it, using the movement of his sword to redirect her mace away from him, then sidestepped blindingly fast behind her, and as she fell forward from the sudden change in her mace, he swung out, flat of his blade smacking into her armored back and causing her to trip and fall. She caught herself on her mace and a knee and used the mace to push herself up and swing it around in one full motion, but Dave dodged again and used his blade to smack her side and push her farther than she intended her momentum to take her. She didn't fall this time, though, and whirled around, swinging wildly at Dave, face flushed. Dave sidestepped and parried and led her all around the field as she tried to keep up, her swings becoming more and more frantic. "Fight me!" she finally cried, frustration seeping into her every move. And Dave obliged. He dodged a blow, then traded with one of his own, hitting her shoulder blade, then spun and hit just below her ribs while she was recovering from the first. She tried to swing back, but Dave smacked his blade into the inside of her elbow, forcing her arm to go wide and her grip to loosen. He swung again, a sword connecting with her waist and causing her to double over and her mace to fly out of her hand. One last strike to her shoulder brought her to her knees, with his blade resting on her neck. "I yield," she panted. Dave nodded and sheathed his sword and helped her off the ground. She limped out as his victory was declared, and Dave followed close behind, shooting a quick thumbs up to the direction of the waiting combatants before he left. "You're smiling," Rose observed. "Is that not allowed?" Dirk asked. "It's encouraged, if unusual. But he is quite the show-off, isn't he?" Dirk nodded. "I just hope he takes his next matches more seriously. Your Fae were something else." Rose snorted. "They're not my Fae. I simply asked if they would like to visit the kingdom and take part in some frivolities. There's one more left, though I don't think she elected to take part in this event." "Then I look forward to seeing in what unique ways she makes a fool of my nobles and knights." Two knights walked out onto the field and were announced. Dirk perked up at the sight of Vantus, curious to see him in action outside of training. "Ah, your other special knight's time to shine. I wonder how he will fare," Rose said lightly. Dirk just grunted, watching as Cervantes immediately took to the offensive once the trumpet sounded, swinging low with his falchion. "Why does he interest you so much?" "Why did you search out the Fae and bring some back with you and enter them into my tournament?" Dirk countered. Rose frowned, but did not respond. Vantus's energy was much more like the Fae before, but lacking the speed and grace. His strikes were like battering rams, focused and hard and effective, but his attention could use some work. Every now and again he would let a swing in and have to leap back as though surprised to avoid another before regaining himself and returning blows back with full force. Maybe the shock of the Fae was wearing on him. Still, he won, pinning his opponent to the wall of the grandstand and forcing a yield. Dirk hoped he would do better in future matches, or maybe all this work was for nothing. Vantas needed to win. "I think I'm gonna throw my next matches," Karkat said. Dave snorted. "No, you won't." Dave had been waiting for Karkat after his match, and they had made their way into the grandstand to watch the rest of the combatants. Jondi, who had won his archery bout, was up and holding his own against a minor lady. Karkat wasn't paying as close attention as he wanted, though. He glared at Dave. "I might! I didn't even want to participate in this bullshit." "That's because you're too obsessed with your conspiracy theories." "I'm not!" Karkat let out a frustrated sigh. "Something is up between you and His Majesty," he whispered. Dave shook his head. "Don't know what you're talking about, Cat." "Don't bullshit me, Dave. Right before the tournament was announced, you were suddenly super on edge anytime he showed up, and you were pissed after it was announced, and now you're just..." Karkat gestured vaguely. "Resigned?" "Karkat, drop it." Karkat had never seen Dave quite so serious. Never heard his voice drop to that low, vaguely threatening growl almost. "Dave, Fine. But this is still bullshit, and I still don't see the point in me actually trying to win." Dave sighed. "If your panties are in that much of a twist over His Highness, maybe proving you're the best of his knights, and you're not afraid to glare at him like he just shat all over your bed, will send a message." Karkat shrugged. "Not to mention, there's no way you'll actually let someone win against you. Too goddamn stubborn for that." Dave laughed and shoved against Karkat, shoulder to shoulder. Karkat shoved back. "Oh, shut the fuck up. At least I actually fight instead of trying to annoy my opponent into surrendering." He was smiling, though. By the time they turned to pay attention to the fight again, Jondi had won, and the masked man from the horse race was on the field with another knight, an unwieldy-looking lance in hand. The knight tried to charge in close, but Invocador easily held him at bay with his lance, jabbing forward and sweeping and taking back any ground the knight gained. Karkat tugged at the hem of his sleeves, then glanced nervously at his friend. "Dave..." "Karkat, don't," Dave warned. "Just tell me one thing, that's it. Do you think he's a bad person? Do you not trust him?" Dave's expression softened, and he looked toward the box the prince and his cousin were sitting in. "He's a good ruler. He's good for this kingdom, and I die for him, as is my duty." "But..." Karkat prodded. Dave shook his head. "That's all that matters." Karkat looked like he wanted to ask something else, but Dave stopped him with a look. "I'm serious, dude. Drop it. Serve your prince, and don't worry about any weird shit he may or may not be planning. As long as it doesn't fuck over the kingdom, it's not our problem." Karkat chewed on his lip, but dropped it. Invocador had won, almost as quickly as Miriam had, and the prince with the Jester-esque face paint was up next. Kurlos Makara, Prince of Prospet, had a club in each hand and calmly watched the knight he was up against dash forward with her short sword and shield. Her shield was up, ready to block any swings, and her sword arm back ready to strike. But 1, 2, quicker than Karkat could see, a club to each side of her head, one to the temple, one to the jaw, the knight collapsed. The prince waved to Prince Deirdric and exited the stadium while a physician rushed past him to get the knight to a cot. Karkat was suddenly wondering if he would even have to throw his matches. These surprise entries were something else. Up last was the Prince of Durs and another knight. He was also a dual wielder, but with daggers rather than clubs. He was fast, dashing up to the knight and scissoring his blades around her flail, then twisting sharply, causing her wrist and arm to bend unnaturally until it was behind her back and she dropped it. Prince Empora kicked her knees out from under her and brought his blade to her throat as she kneeled below him. She tried to kick back at him, but he stomped on her leg and she cried out, "Yield! I yield!" The prince pushed himself off of her and sheathed his blades. He neither acknowledged the announcement of his victory nor Prince Deirdric. Yeah, these fuckers were something else indeed. First round of armed combat results. Kanaya, Feferi, Dave, Karkat, Jondi, Rufio, Kurlos, and Aridin advanced to the quarterfinals. Is that it? Oh. Yeah, I had the horseback race on here too. No horseback race in this chapter. Yeah, these are my first fights I've ever written. So, it was pretty interesting to do, to say the least. I had to actually try to look up what weapons were, trying to think of what each one would have, because they wouldn't have their exact weapons from Homestuck. So, it was definitely interesting. I think I did a pretty good job writing the fights, surprisingly, because again, I hadn't written fights before, but I think they ended up being pretty good. I really like writing Dave fighting because he just kind of does whatever the fuck he wants. Or he doesn't get hit. He just kind of he basically trolls people when he fights, which I think is a very Dave thing to do. Okay, yeah, because I have the second horseback race on here again. I might have to go back and edit the summaries. Okie dokie. Okie dokie. Oh yeah, so the reason that Rufio is Rufio and Vacador is because I did not want I didn't want Tavros and Rufio to be related, I don't think, in this fic. So I had to come up with a different last name for Rufio, and so I just turned Summoner into Spanish. So that's the whole thing behind that. And yeah, Roxy is a Strider because she kind of abandoned her last name. Dirk and Rose are both Lalons. I don't think I ever say their last names in this so far, but they're both Lalons. So Roxy and Dave are the Striders. Dirk and Rose are the Lalons. And that's how that shakes out. So yeah, in this one we got the, in Chapter 7, Tournament Day 3, Part 4, we have the second horseback race with John, 8 unknown, the first round of unarmed combat with Karkat, 15 unknown, third horseback race with Equius, and 8 unknown. Oh, yeah. Quarterfinals are being moved to the 4th day rather than the 3rd day. I forgot that I intended it to be that way. The preliminaries took longer than I thought. So whenever I thought about this, I didn't intend on having the preliminaries. It was supposed to be quarterfinals on up. But I kind of didn't want to start off with them just immediately losing to people, if that made sense. So yeah, I ended up including a lot more fights than I initially intended. And I had to change my timeline a lot. Rose did not join Dirk to watch the race, instead opting to sit with her winged fae in the general seating and pretend they weren't causing a stir. The lineup wasn't anything exciting after the last event. The prospect knight from the archery competition, Tavros Nitrum, was being secured into his saddle with some sort of device attached to and extending from his arms, assumedly to direct the horse where his legs could not. The fish fae, Feferi Pixis, was also there, babbling happily to the knights and nobles next to her, Lord Egbert being the only one really engaging back. The trumpet went off and the race began, but Dirk barely paid attention, instead looking through the crowd. He spotted Strider and Vantis were here as well, but tried not to pay too close attention lest Vantis decide to switch seats again. Still, he watched them more than he watched the race, only looking up to see that, once again, 3 clear victors emerged early on, the 2 surprise entrants and Lord Egbert. He wondered if he should ask Captain Pyrope to up his knight's horseback training, since so far Strider had been the only one to make it close to the top. A thought for another time. Strider seemed enthralled by the race, but Vantis was distracted again. Dirk frowned, but supposed that his attention span didn't particularly matter outside of his fights. As long as he focused more on his next bouts, Dirk didn't particularly care if he was distractible in his leisure time. After all, Dirk wasn't much better, because as much as he was trying to avoid looking at the man in yellow that was also watching the race, cheering on his fellow Prospician who was slowly taking the lead, it nagged at the back of his mind. Unfortunately, his eyes slipped again to Jake, who happened to glance his way at the same time, and their eyes locked for just a second. Jake smiled, and Dirk looked away. Rose was right. He was far, far too human. Pixies crossed the finish line. The crowd of people were beginning to stand, some moving toward where the riders would be dismounting, others to go back to the grandstand for the next event. Dirk slipped out of his stand and down the ladder and made his way back to his box seating in the grandstand, relieved as he passed by a searching Jake English unnoticed. Second horseback race results. John, Tavros, Fetheri, moving on to the final race on day 5. Karkat was pacing. Again. Dave wasn't there this time, so he had to distract himself from the Prospician prince and one of his knights, the one who seemed to be friendly with his majesty, and, well, everyone now, it seemed. A very wolf-like woman who was probably with the other 2 fae who were just sitting there grinning. And less troubling, but still distracting, yet another masked woman, giggling in the corner with the one from the archery competition, Roxy Strider. Karkat knew the last name didn't imply relation. It actually implied the opposite, the inherent lack of any relation. But he couldn't stop thinking about Dave when he looked at her. So he did his best to not. Not at her, not at any of the others. The other nobles and knights seemed equally invested in trying to ignore the strangers, except for one noble with some sort of blue and red tinted goggles strapped to his face, the leather helmet on his head, who seemed to be the only one succeeding in the task. When an announcer came to usher the first pair out, it was that noble and a knight up first. The others in the waiting area didn't seem as interested in watching this comparatively unexciting match, but it was a good distraction for Karkat, who was glad the narrow slit he was looking through didn't let him see the prince, and presumably didn't let the prince see him in turn. The match began, and the knight tripped on the first step she took to the noble. She recovered quickly and threw a fist at him, but he dodged and she stumbled again. The noble threw a punch toward her face, which she tried to block with her arms crossed in front of her, but the angle she put her clenched hands at caused the force from the noble's punch to make her hit herself in the eye. Something wasn't right. She didn't let it faze her, though her face was red, and she countered with a punch to his gut. She barely missed and fell forward again, tripping over her feet as she did so. The noble brought an elbow down on her back and she collapsed. The knight tried to get up, but her right hand got caught on her left sleeve and she fell again. This was painful to watch, and Karkat hoped her many fumbles weren't as obvious at the distance the audience was at, but something wasn't right. Karkat had never known the knight to be clumsy, and the nobles seemed to almost be expecting each of the slip-ups with the counter-move prepared as they happened. The knight flipped to her back and kicked up, but the noble caught her leg and flipped her back around, then pinned her to the ground under his boot. He bent down and seemed to say something to her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then said, "I yield," almost too softly for the announcer to hear. Untitled Chapter was declared the winner. He lifted his goggles just a bit to wipe sweat from under them, and Karkat caught the briefest glimpse of what he was beginning to suspect. A deep green glow that was quickly fading. The noble had been using his aspect in the match. Karkat chewed his lip, then stormed out of the waiting area outside of the grandstand, calling, "I'll be back!" I don't know what I did with Karkat's voice there. "I'll be back!" to the concerned knights left in his wake. He dashed around the side of the stadium until he reached the slightly hidden steps that led to the prince's booth, both annoyed and relieved there were no guards to go through. He took the stairs 2 at a time and fell to one knee, panting as soon as he reached the entrance. Karkat glanced up through his mess of hair to see His Majesty relax the grip he had on the dagger at his waist. "Majesty," Karkat said, "forgive the interruption." "Cervantes," Prince Diedrich said, surprise apparent in his voice. "How can I help you?" "Lord Captor is a cheat." The trumpet blasted, but Karkat couldn't make out who was being announced. "Do you have any proof?" the prince asked, so calm that Karkat realized he knew. "No, but..." "Can you get any proof?" "No, but..." "Then my hands are tied." Karkat looked up angrily, locking eyes with his liege. "So that's it? You'll just let a cheat run rampant? Is that the kind of tournament you're holding?" The prince stared impassively back. "What would you have me do, Sir Knight?" "I would have you throw him out. Have a rematch for the knight who was disqualified against him." "And is that how I should rule? Casting judgment and punishment with no proof?" "I saw him." "You saw him cheat?" "I saw afterward. His eyes were glowing." "Afterward? After he had won?" "Yes, Karkat faltered, understanding the implication, and his gaze lowered again. He took a breath to steady himself, then said, "This isn't right." "It's not," the prince agreed. Another trumpet blast signaling another quick defeat. The name announced wasn't familiar to Karkat. Nep? Something, maybe? Must have been one of the 2 women Karkat hadn't recognized. Dirk looked out... Oh, that should say Prince Diedrich instead of Dirk. Shit. Looked out to the field below. "One of your brethren is up next. Go support them." Karkat frowned, but got up and turned to leave. "And Cervantes?" Karkat turned back slightly, but didn't try to make eye contact. "Thank you for coming to me with this. It will be dealt with." Karkat's brow furrowed, and he opened his mouth to ask what the prince meant, but Prince Diedrich was already back to his seat in a clear dismissal. Karkat bowed. "Majesty," then left. As soon as he heard Vantis descend the last step, Dirk let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He was not supposed to have talked to him yet. Not that this conversation upset his plans, he didn't think, but it put him on edge, those deep red eyes staring into him from barely 2 paces away. Dirk shook his head and tried to focus on the match, lest anyone think he was snubbing the Prince of Prospect. He glanced over the crowd and saw his cousin sitting with the 2 fae currently announced. Apparently, now that they were out in the open, she no longer felt the need to sit with him. Just as well. She was nosing too much into his plans, just as he was sure he was nosing too much into hers. And after Cervantes bursting into his box, he was quite thankful she wasn't there to bear witness, and hoped Vantis had stayed close enough to the stairs that he wasn't seen by anyone in the audience. Unless, of course, he was seen, but Dirk, unfortunately, could not control what Rose could see with her aspect. He was still distracted. He refocused on the match below, the knight up against the prince already looking worse for wear. They ran up to Prince Kurlos, a fist pulled back and ready, but he crouched swiftly and kicked their legs out from under them. The knight scrambled back, trying to create enough distance to get back up, but as soon as they pushed themselves up, the prince kicked out. The knight clutched their side and cried out, faced now to the ground and struggling to push themselves up with one arm. The Prospician prince paced around them, watching as they fell back to the ground and ready to pounce again as soon as they stood up. But they didn't stand back up. They raised a hand and called out their yield, and a physician immediately rushed forward to help them off the field. Prince Kurlos waved to Dirk again and exited the stadium. One of his nobles and knights were up next, and Dirk could not pay attention to them, then smirked to himself at the irony as he recalled criticizing Vantis' lack of attention earlier. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe Vantis was paying too close attention. Not that he minded in this instance. He was sincere when he told the knight he appreciated that he came to Dirk for this, especially considering the man's apparent distaste for him. It eased his mind somewhat, really, as flat-out disobedience in all situations was inherently troublesome. But Vantus was still a knight of honor and duty-bound, and he seemed to take both seriously, and Dirk hoped that would work in his favor. Dirk paused, realizing how much worse he felt thinking of Vantus as a pawn after he had actually spoken to the man. He felt ill, and he wondered if maybe he wasn't too human after all. Karkat paced. Another night lost, this time to just a regular-ass noble. It set him on edge, made him feel like this whole tournament was set up to make fools of them rather than to celebrate them. It added to his ever-growing pile of conspiracy theories. To be fair, the noble who won, Dami Karmia, who also won her round of archery, was one of the few Skya nobles who won as well, so maybe if there was some ploy to demean them, it wasn't just his fellow knights. Misery loves company, right? Roxy Strider was up next, with a noble this time at least. Karkat eyed her as she passed, and flustered when she winked at him. As soon as the trumpet sounded, Roxy dashed to the noble, swept her legs under him, knocking him to the ground, then jumped back a couple of paces. The noble pushed himself up, forearms posed in front of his face, and warily advanced. Roxy fake stepped to the left, then quickly switched to the right, and her leg slammed into his side, buckling him over. But as he bent forward, he grabbed her leg and tried to pull her off balance, but she pulled that leg down hard, bringing the noble with it. He didn't let go, though, and twisted as he fell, making Roxy stagger and fall over him. Instead of trying to get up, she threw a punch to his jaw, and he didn't block in time, and she brushed off his attempt to counter. Karkat had trouble seeing the next few moves. It seemed like the noble tried to push her off of him, and they rolled for a bit, until she managed to get him on his stomach and pin one arm and one leg behind his back. He struggled, refusing to yield, until Roxy sat on him for another few seconds, now looking relatively bored, and the announcer forced the issue. Roxy hopped off the noble and skipped out of the stadium, her opponent following slowly behind. Karkat was next, up against another noble. They shook hands before the match, as though acknowledging that they were the only originally intended contestants, then walked a few paces away from each other and waited for their cue. When the sound went off, they dashed toward each other again, both stopping short of getting back into arm's reach. Karkat feinted forward, and the noble stepped back. The noble tried to feint, but Karkat recognized it and caught them under the jaw, then, when they failed to recover in time, got them in the gut as well. The noble doubled over, then lunged forward, grabbing Karkat by the waist and driving him back. Karkat's feet barely kept pace as he slammed his fists into their back, trying to get out before he was pinned to the wall. But the noble's arms were locked tight. Thinking quickly, he pushed against his instincts and let himself fall back and feet slide forward. The noble tumbled ahead without him as he slammed hard onto his back. Karkat was dazed for a second, but he recovered before the noble did and scrambled to his feet, readying himself in the few more seconds it took for them to recover as well. As soon as the noble was unsteadily on their feet, arms not quite sturdy in front of them, Karkat socked them in the cheek and they stumbled back into the wall they were trying to pin Karkat to. Karkat readied another punch, but waited, and the noble threw up their hands and yielded. Karkat relaxed, then helped them over to the position, resisting the urge to look up at the prince as his victory was announced. Karkat tried to wait around with the noble to make sure they were okay, but the physician waved him off, and he grumblingly went out to meet Dave, who had left his seat to wait for him by the exit. "Want to go back and watch the last two matches?" Dave asked, already heading that direction. Karkat shook his head, but didn't offer an alternative. Dave looked at him, but shrugged, and led him over to the food vendors to grab cups of mulled wine and a chunk of hard cheese, then over to a small grove of trees at the outskirts of the tournament area. They sat in silence for a few moments, until Dave asked, "Want to talk about it?" "It's not a big deal." "Big enough to keep you quiet for more than 30 seconds. Karkat smacked him lightly. "Rich, coming from you." Dave laughed. Karkat let the silence go on for another few moments, then said, "I talked to His Majesty." Dave jerked, spilling some of his wine. "You what? Karkat, what the fuck? I mean, what the fuck?" "I didn't go accusing him of shit if that's what you're thinking," Karkat said quickly. Dave's mouth formed a tight line, but he seemed a little appeased. I just had to tell him about the bullshit that went down in the first match. That cheating fucking noble piece of shit. Wait, Dave said. You're telling me you went to His Highness, Prince Deirdric, Lord of the Bullshit Fields, founder of the Puppet Society, etc., to tell him about someone cheating? Karkat looked confused. Yeah? Dave popped the last of the cheese in his mouth and used his now free hand to cover his face. He swallowed, then looked back at Karkat. Why did you not go to this servant on the field, or one of his advisors, or, I don't know, anyone else? Karkat thought for a moment. They didn't seem... enough? Enough, Dave repeated. Karkat shrugged, suddenly feeling defensive. I mean, might as well go to the top dog, right? Karkat, I think we both know this is more about your weird-ass fucking paranoia about him than that. Karkat frowned. I don't! Nope. Nuh-uh. Don't want to hear it. Doesn't matter why you think you did it. It happened. Just don't fucking do it again, okay? Don't confront the literal heir to the Sky Throne about some tournament bullshit that legitimately doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Fine. Promise? Yes, I promise, you overdramatic dipshit, Karkat grumbled. First round of unarmed combat results. Matuna, Kurlos, Dami, Roxy, Karkat, Jade, Jake advanced to the quarterfinals. Karkat wasn't sure how long they sat there. He just knew neither of them cared to watch the last round of the race, Dave not entirely caring who he was up against. Except Lord Egbert, Karkat had teased. Eventually, the two got up and mingled with their fellow knights, idly checking out their new rotation of vendors, before calling it an early night before their quarterfinals and possibly semifinals the next day. Third horseback race results. Equius, Nepeta, Jade move on to the final race on day 5. Dirk tried not to be troubled when he didn't see Vantis or Strider for the rest of the day. Unfortunately, that meant his mind jumped to Jake English, who had bowed deeply but smiled a little too smugly after his victorious match in unarmed combat. He was glad Rose was occupied with the 3 Fae, sure she would sniff out his preoccupations if she tried, and that thought also provided an even better distraction. The last to be revealed Fae, a wolf girl named Jade Harley, won both her unarmed combat bout and placed in the race, which made all 3 set to go to the next rounds. While Dirk doubted that all Rose wanted was for them to have some fun outside of the liminal forests, she sure had something else up her sleeve. The group of 4 did genuinely look happy, like there truly was nothing else weighing them down, just thoughts of their matches to come. Something akin to envy bubbled up in Dirk, but he quickly shoved it back down as the other princes approached him. Congratulations on moving to the quarterfinals, he said. Prince Aridin snorted. Like that was fucking hard. Prince Kurlos inclined his head, then looked to the group Dirk had been observing moments earlier. His hand flashed as he signed a question. What the fuck is up with them? The Dursite prince translated. My cousin has brought them out to give them a tour of what Sky has to offer, apparently. Prince Kurlos signed again, and Aridin snorted. Never so simple with the Fae freaks. They always got something else going on. Aridin mused for a moment. Could say the same thing about Seers, to be quite fucking frank. Dirk smirked. I'm sure they do, but I'm not overly concerned. Prince Kurlos looked more serious as he signed. Prince Aridin nodded. Don't underestimate the Fae, Deirdric. Sky may not have dealt with them more than a handful of time in decades, but our countries have had their share of conflicts with them. When we weren't too busy fighting each other, right? He snickered and elbowed Prince Kurlos, who smiled at him. And if Dirk thought the smile was cold, maybe he was just projecting. Time for a topic change. I'm surprised Kurlos brought representatives with him, yet you did not, Aridin. Kurlos shrugged. I wasn't looking for any volunteers. Though neither was Curly. That English guy just kept insisting this was a good training exercise for Nitram, and Kurlos here said, fuck it, why not? Kurlos nodded and shrugged again. Speaking of this shit, why are you keeping those masked morons around? Dirk shrugged. I want to see what they're up to. Aridin let out a derisive snort. Your funeral, I guess. Or your empty coffers, or whatever the fuck. Which, by the way, you better have something better than money planned for a prize. I know someone said bullshit about a secret prize to whoever was worthy. He said the last in a deep, dramatic tone. But I don't need any of that. Are bragging rights not enough? Aridin smirked. Being able to say I trounced the best of motherfucking Sky is pretty good. You got me there. I just hope it doesn't stay as easy as it's been so far. Kurlos nodded in agreement. Anyway, your sweaty Lord Sahak is shacking us up and is probably turning into a puddle wondering where the fuck we're at. You could have stayed at the castle, you know. Aridin snorted again. Yeah, no thanks. Especially not since the horse guy is funny as shit. We'll see you tomorrow, Deodric. Kurlos inclined his head again, and Dirk returned the gesture. Then the two princes left. Everything well? Dirk tried not to jump as his cousin appeared beside him. Just keeping up with formalities. He looked over to the Fae bunched together, watching them. Are they to be joining us at the castle? Rose shook her head. They have other housing arrangements. In fact, I think I'll be joining them tonight. Adjusting to being around so many people again is difficult. She sighed and shook her head. Dirk just nodded. She gave him a peck on the cheek and said, I'll see you tomorrow, cousin. Then went back to the waiting women. So, with nothing left to do, and not wanting to linger and invite more conversation, Dirk returned to his castle, alone once again. Notes and words were finally exchanged. So, whenever Dirk said that the conversation wasn't supposed to happen yet, that was also me saying that I did not intend for Karkat and Dirk to talk until the tournament was over. But then this just happened. It just felt like a thing that needed to happen, and it did. So I wrote it. And that's just how writing goes sometimes, I guess. I just got a notification on my phone to expect snow tomorrow. That's how it goes. I'm debating if I want to do another one. It's been almost an hour. Because these are now longer. Now, because like the first chapter, I think, was like 800 or 900 words. And most of the rest average around 2,000. So, it definitely takes a lot longer to do. But, yeah, you see me subtly trying to skip past having to write too many fucking fights. Because, like, later on, obviously, I have to write, like, all the fights in the semifinals and the finals, definitely. I can't remember if I wrote all the quarterfinal fights. Because, like, those are more important. Like, those... Yeah. Yeah, snow, blah. I get you. Though, to be fair, I just got a picture notifications that, like, 1 year ago you took this picture. And there was definitely a lot of snow this time last year. That's living in Minnesota for you. But yeah, let me see. Because this chapter is just the Armed Combat Quarterfinals. We're the starting of Tournament Day 4 Part 1. Yeah, I think I'll do this one. Lee, do you need a recap for what's going on? But you've read my fic up till now, so you should know vaguely what's going on in this. Yeah, we just finished all the preliminaries, so we're good. Okay, let's get started on this shit then. Now, let me zoom in again. Okay, Chapter 8, Tournament Day 4, Part 1, Armed Combat Quarterfinals, Dave Strider, John DeCarr. Okay, see ya, Cal. Dave Strider, John DeCarr, Karkat Vantis, Kurlos Makara, Aridin Empora, Kanaya Miriam, and Rufio Invocador. The fourth day of the tournament was bright and cool and began earlier than Karkat personally liked. He did his morning stretches with some of the other knights and was about to grab a quick breakfast from the mess hall when Captain Pyrope gestured for him to follow her. She led him over to a corner where Dave and John D were waiting and paced in front of them. Oh god, what was my Latula voice again? You three are the only ones who made it past the preliminaries, she said, trying to keep her voice even. I need you. We need you to win this. For us. This was supposed to be our moment, and... She cut herself off abruptly, then sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. I took a look at the schedule. None of you are against each other, so there are no excuses not to see each of you in the semifinals. The three knights nodded. Of course, John D said. Easy breezy, Dave said. Like I'd lose to any of those assholes, Karkat said. Captain Pyrope grinned widely. Good. Strider, you're up first, so get ready quick. Do what you need to do, then make us proud. Dave gave a little salute, and the four separated again. By the time Karkat finished wolfing down his porridge and bread roll, Dave had already left for the tournament. Dirk frowned as he walked through the lines of stalls, watching the merchants and artisans set up for the day. Several of them yawned and stretched, then jumped when they saw him, and Dirk did his best to stifle his own yawn. Still, he paced back and forth, waving through the food stalls and weapon stands, frowning at them all. You're making them nervous, Rose said, getting the jump on Dirk for the second time in less than 24 hours. You're getting sneaky. I've always been sneaky, dear, she said, smiling. Is something the matter? Dirk glanced back and saw the three Fae following at a respectable distance, then looked back to Rose. Rose followed his eyes and said, You can trust them as you do me, or if you truly feel uncomfortable, I can send them away. Dirk shook his head. I almost did my Karkat voice for Dirk. It's nothing anyway. Something just feels off. Something looks wrong everywhere I turn, and I cannot place my finger on what. We'll find out in due time, I'm sure. Rose patted his arm. In any case, I have been informed that I have been quite rude and not introduced you to my companions properly. Would you care to cease your stalking around and instead grab a bite of food with us before people finish filtering into the grounds? Dirk glanced back at the three, then nodded. Of course. The group made their way to Master Crocker's baker stand and grabbed a basket of pastries, waving off the guild leader's insistence to take more because... Oh, what was my Jane voice? Half of you are far too thin for my liking, and a bite of sweet is no substitute for breakfast. Then they made their way to some seating that had been arranged nearby. Despite the table being round, it felt as though Dirk sat opposite the four women, and had the rare feeling that he was not the one with power here. Still, they had politely waited for him to sit and begin eating before they did the same, and looked at him expectantly. I understand you three are from the Liminal Forests and are new to the kingdom. I assume my cousin has already told you who I am, but in case she has failed to, I am Prince Diedrich, heir to the throne of Skya, and I welcome you to my kingdom. He thought for a moment, then added, You may call me Dirk. It might ruffle a few feathers depending on in what company they chose to do so, but these were not his subjects after all. The three Fae inclined their heads, and Miriam introduced herself first. I have so many voices. Griffin is fucking magic being able to do so many voices. I am Kanaya Miriam, apprentice to the Mother of the Forest. I thank you for your hospitality and allowing us to join your festivities. I'm Feferi Pixis, guardian of the streams, and I look forward to playing with your contestants some more. I'm Jade Harley, ambassador to the Witch's Grove, and I do hope the rest of your people are not quite so frail as the gentleman I was against earlier. And your horses, so skittish. Be nice, Jade, Kanaya said. Jade's ear twitched. I am! Rose looked pleased. Do you know how long you'll be visiting Skya? Dirk asked. Now, Dirk, let's not mix business with pleasure. There will be plenty of time for you to interrogate them once your tournament is over. Fair enough. Besides, Kanaya said, I am the first match of the day, so I at least shouldn't linger. I merely wish to be properly introduced, since Rose has apparently forgotten her manners. Rose smiled bashfully, and Kanaya smiled back. Dirk said. Rose shot him a look, and for a second he thought she might stick her tongue out at him. You're right, Kanaya dear. Let us be off. And as suddenly as they had come to him, they left, leaving Dirk with an over half-full basket of pastries. He frowned at it, as though it was the source of all his unease and unanswered questions, then opted to take it with him to his seating in the grandstand. Dave was standing at the entrance to the stadium from beneath the grandstand when Karkat arrived. His sword was gripped in his hand, and he didn't turn as Karkat approached. "You okay?" Karkat asked. Dave shrugged. "Ready as I'll ever be. Wait, shit, that's not what you asked. Sorry, Cat. I'm wigging out a little bit, TBH. Karkat slung an arm across his friend's shoulders. "You got this, Dave. You're the only one I want to go up to in the finals." Dave snickered. "Feeling cocky, are we?" "Not even a little bit." They laughed, and their nervous energy started to work its way out. More people filtered into the room, Miriam among them. Dave turned to look, and their eyes caught. They gave each other a solemn nod, and Dave stared out into the field again. The seats in the bleachers began filling with a crowd of people, and Karkat noticed the telltale shock of blue. He slapped his hand against Dave's shoulder and said, "Well, Lord Egbert is watching, so now you definitely can't fuck it up." Dave rolled his eyes. "Thanks, dude. No pressure at all." After what felt like both seconds and hours, Dave stepped aside for the announcer to post the schedule for the armed combat event on the wall and checked everyone off of his list. He looked between Dave and Miriam. "Are you ready?" "Don't know what that voice was," he asked. They both nodded. "Very well. I will be back for both of you shortly." The announcer made his way to the middle of the field, unrolled a scroll, and said, "Today marks the start of the quarterfinals. There will be 4 matches, and the winner of each will move on to the semifinals later today. Up first, we have the armed combat contestants as follows. Sir Dave Strider versus Kanaya Merriam. Sir John D. Carr versus His Highness Prince Kurlos Ankara. Feferi Pixis versus His Highness Prince Aridin Ampora. And finally, Rufio Invacada versus Sir Karkat Vantis." A polite applause went through the crowd. First up, Dave Strider, Royal Knight of Skya, and Kanaya Merriam of the Liminal Forests. He gestured to the waiting area, and Merriam and Dave walked out and took their places on either side of the stadium. The announcer took his place on a short ledge overlooking them and signaled for the trumpet to be blown. Dave braced himself, but Merriam didn't charge straight in this time. They walked in tighter and tighter circles around each other, until Dave was a step out of reach from Merriam's great axe, but she wasn't quite as close to his short sword. They circled each other like this for another minute or so, Merriam tall and at the ready, while Dave was hunched over, braced for impact. He dashed forward, sword aiming for her middle. She blocked it and pushed back with her axe, then used that momentum to bring it down on his shoulder. Dave dodged, missing the full force of the blow, but it hit the edge of his non-dominant arm, which he shook as he jumped back a few paces. They circled again, but didn't get any closer. Dave sprinted forward again, and Merriam prepared the same counter, but at the last second he lunged to her side, just barely getting behind her, and slammed his sword in the base of her spine, right underneath her wings. Even at a distance, Karkat could see the O her face made in shock as she arched back and stumbled. She caught herself with the handle of her axe, but Dave was on her again, sword connecting right underneath the joint between arm and shoulder. The grip on her axe loosened, but she quickly tossed it to her other hand, her dominant arm now limp at her side, and arced it wide to catch Dave's hip as he was trying to put distance between them. He fell hard on his ass, and barely managed to get his sword up in time to block the blow from Miriam's axe coming from above. He pushed himself back with his feet and free hand, the arm still trembling with exertion from the hit earlier. He was up, though almost backed against the wall. Yeah, I wish, sorry, I got distracted seeing the notification. Yeah, I wish, Kadaya had wings, too. He was up, though almost backed against the wall. He leveraged his right heel against it and shoved himself off, sword pointed forward. He caught Miriam's shoulder hard enough the force pushed it up and over those shivering scales and sliced into her wing behind it. She cried out, and Dave hesitated, which was a mistake. Miriam drove forward, forcing Dave to be on the defensive and not to do much about it with her long reach. Blows rained in from diagonal slashes down on him, faster than he could keep up with. He was able to dodge or block most of them, but Karkat could see the occasional reverberations in his armor and the bit of blood dripping down from the side of his neck. Running out of options, Dave dropped into a crouch and dived out to the side, Miriam's axe creating a dust cloud from the spot he just occupied. He quickly righted himself, crouched on the balls of his feet, sword arm up, and launched himself at Miriam, who turned around, ready to block. At the last second, Dave tossed his short sword to his bad arm and swung, hitting her hard in the middle. This time she buckled and collapsed to one knee, axe out of her grip, and Dave's sword held in both hands at her throat. "I yield," she said. It sounded soft, but her voice managed to reverberate through the stadium. The crowd cheered and Dave dropped his arms, then used his good one to help Miriam up, and they staggered off the field together. Johnny clapped Karkat on the shoulder excitedly. Both of them relieved and hopeful, as it was a good sign for them. The confidence boost was needed, as Johnny was up next against the Prince of Prospect. If Johnny won this, then it was a guarantee at least one knight would make it to the finals, and gods did Karkat want that security. He didn't get it. Sir Johnny Carr made a valiant effort when the trumpet sounded. He approached cautiously, he feinted, he even dodged the prince's first blow. But the second went to his hip so hard he staggered. He almost caught himself from falling, but Prince Kurlo slammed both clubs into the knight's back and he collapsed. Karkat's gut twisted as he watched Jondi struggle to get up, even on his elbows, but another blow to the base of his spine, and he cried out and slapped the ground 3 times to signal his yield. The crowd was silent as the prince watched a physician's assistant run up to help Sir Jondi off the field. Prince Kurlos waved to Prince Diedrich's box and strolled casually out of the stadium. All confidence and hope gained after Dave's match was crushed so quickly it created a void of dread in its wake. Karkat pushed down his anxiety for his own match coming up so quickly, for Dave, who would have to fight Prince Kurlos in the semifinals, and instead forced his attention to the next match. The Prince from Durs and the Water Fae were up next. Prince Aredin sneered at the Fae, who simply bared her row of shark teeth back at him in a gesture only a fool would call a smile. At the sound of the trumpet, the prince dashed forward, daggers at the ready, while Pyxis simply watched with her polearm at her side. He went for the wrist of the hand holding her weapon, but as soon as he got in range, she swung the staff low and swept his feet out from under him. He lay on his back for a second, then rolled as the butt of the weapon descended to his chest. He pushed himself back to his feet, then launched himself at the Fae again, clearly keeping a better eye on the polearm this time. Pyxis sidestepped and swung the polearm around her back, into her other hand, and into the prince's back, knocking him to his hands and knees. Instead of bothering to get up, he swung a dagger at her legs, but she just used both hands to pitch the staff and sweep his hand away. It connected right below his palm, and his dagger went flying. The prince scrambled to his feet and lunged after his blade, but Pyxis was quicker. She grabbed her polearm tightly with both hands and swung, knocking the prince on his back so hard Karkat swore he could hear the impact and all the air forced out of Prince Aredin's lungs. The Fae quickly flipped her polearm upside down and pressed the triple point to the prince's throat. They stared at each other, his chest heaving. Prince Aredin smacked the ground 3 times and he was out. Pyxis removed her weapon, then held her arm out to help the prince up, but he brushed her off and clambered to his feet himself, walking past the awaiting physician and out the stadium hunched over, arms clutched across his chest. The Fae followed, a few paces behind. A hand clapped Karkat on the shoulder, and he jolted before glaring at the perpetrator. His glare had to travel up several more inches before meeting the gleaming bronze eyes of the last man in the room, his opponent, Rufio Invocador. "Hey, good look at there, man." The tall, well-muscled, how had Karkat not noticed how big he was before, man said with a wink before heading out onto the field. Karkat's mind scrambled, trying to combine what little he remembered of the man's earlier match with the tactics he just saw used by Pyxis. The masked man stood across from him, holding his lance like he was in a jousting tournament, then on his feet, and grinning at Karkat, who did his best to refrain from chewing his lip. The trumpet sounded and Karkat didn't move. They stared at each other for a few moments, then Invocador began to casually walk forward, lance still at the ready. Karkat bounced on the balls of his feet, and Invocador became more cautious the closer he approached. "Are you just going to stand there all?" Karkat lunged forward into a roll. Invocador tried to bring his lance down on him, but he missed. Karkat popped up, less than a foot away, and sliced out with his falchion at the masked man's middle. Invocador winced and tried to leap back, but Karkat brought his sword up, catching the elbow joint of his armor and twisting until the man was forced to twist himself at the hips, legs not quite keeping up with the motion. He stumbled forward, and Karkat brought his sword down and hard on the center of his back, then on his dominant shoulder, forcing Invocador to let go of the grip he had on his lance that was keeping him upright. The masked man fell to his knees, but when Karkat raised his arms to strike again, he grabbed his lance just a full inches below the pointed tip and stabbed at Karkat's stomach. The blow pushed Karkat a few steps back, and Invocador flicked his wrist to shift his grip down the lance's shaft a few more inches to gain more ground. Fuck. Karkat needed to stay close or he didn't have a chance. Another wrist flick, another pace back. Another wrist flick, and Karkat swung his sword down on the staff, as close to Invocador's hand as he could. The vibrations from the blow moved through his wrist, but he kept it ready as the lance was smashed out of Invocador's grip. Karkat lunged forward, swiping at the man's chest and driving him a few paces back from his weapon. Invocador looked between Karkat and his lance and did the math quickly. He raised his hands and said, "You got me, man. I yield. I yield." He was grinning again. Karkat lowered his falchion. His name was called out as victor, and the announcer informed the audience that archery quarterfinals would be starting shortly. Karkat reflexively looked up to the prince's box as he walked out of the stadium and practically choked on his own tongue. The prince was watching him, and as soon as they made whatever feeble eye contact they could at this distance, he raised the pastry he was in the middle of eating into a mock salute. He heard Invocador laugh behind him, but did not look back at him or his majesty as he stomped off the field. The image of Dirk saluting with a pastry is just forever hilarious to me, and I'm glad I wrote that in there. Just Dirk and his fucking basket of pastries for these couple of chapters. What else in this one? So Aridin and Feferi were originally not going to go against each other. I forget who the original pairing was. Maybe Aridin was supposed to win that match. I forget. My original shit was all different. But I just thought it was funny, Aridin going against Feferi. And then someone pointed out that it was really funny that in this, I now had Aridin being racist toward Feferi. Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you like Dirk with the food thing too. I gave him a basket of pastries, and then I had to keep in mind that he had this basket of pastries and just have him do shit with it. But yeah. Yeah, this is just kind of more setup for shit. God, there are so many characters in this. And yeah. Just lots of just minor shit. Just more foreshadowing shit, especially at the beginning of this one. I think I'm going to leave it off here because it's been about an hour, and man, it is hard to be talking this whole time. Oh yeah, Feferi definitely wounded Aridin's pride. Aridin's a little bitch baby about this shit. I love Aridin, don't get me wrong. I love writing Aridin in this fic so much. But yeah, no, he definitely slammed the ground rather than saying that he yielded out loud, so he didn't have to say the words that he yielded. That's true too. It is a nice reverse of that. Like, sure, Aridin killed her in the comic, but she kicked his ass in this, as should be. But I love Aridin. I really do. Aridin gets good in a couple of chapters. He gets his shit. Yeah, so Aridin just losing against Feferi here was really nice. Next is the archery, where, yeah, he's in there again, and that's very exciting too. I really like Aridin. He was really fun to write. Kurlos was surprisingly fun to write as well, even though he doesn't have any lines technically. I just like them. They got shit going on. Really all these characters were fun to write. Like, it was nice having fucking Rufio in here. Love that dude. And just him kind of like low-key flirty with Karkat. A lot of people are low-key flirty with Karkat. Karkat's just good like that. So yeah. But yeah, I am going to end it off here for now. I did 5 chapters the first time. Only, 3 chapters this time? 6, 7, 8? Because they get longer now, and reading is hard. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it. I don't know if I'm going to do this again tomorrow. It's just going to be kind of as I feel like it, just like I kind of felt like it today. And I'm not a good streamer because I don't make schedules for shit, because I don't want to keep up with schedules. So just whenever. Aw, thank you, Lee. That's very sweet. Yeah. They do feel like my original characters sometimes, but yeah, I'm glad I still managed to keep them in character. To their own little... I mean, that's like the best you can do with an AU is like, yeah, they're doing different shit, but like, they still kind of have like a base there. But yeah, so I will be posting this on YouTube again. My YouTube is Jax Does Homestuck. No, it's not. It's Live Laugh Stuck. That's my old YouTube was Jax Does Homestuck. This is Live Laugh Stuck. You can find a link to my YouTube on my Twitter, which is Dirkification, as in Bibofication, but with Dirk. Y'all should know this. A couple of you looking right now follow me on there, but you know, for the people who might be watching later who don't. So yeah, I'll keep posting them there, and I'll let you guys know whenever it's up, and I'll let you guys know when I decide to record again. Thank you guys for joining me. This is a lot of fun to just read out loud, and maybe will be helpful for people who have a hard time sitting down and reading shit. So I will see you when I see you.